I've witnessed with my colleagues here an appalling and evil act perpetrated against the people of Northern Ireland.
On the 15th of August 1998, Omagh in Northern Ireland was hit by one of the worst single atrocities ever to hit the province.
People that I meet on the street every day, called by their first name, as those are the people who've been killed and maimed.
I could hear screaming and I could hear alarms going off. And it was then that I looked down and just saw that my foot was just not there anymore.
A 500-pound bomb exploded in the small market town on a busy Saturday afternoon.
I had to go home and tell Patsy and Sharon and Kathy that Aidan wouldn't be coming home.
29 people and 2 unborn children were murdered when an incorrect warning was given.
The police sent people to the wrong place and everybody ran into the path of the bomb.
And more heartache was to follow.
I don't know where the bomb's going. There'll be a bomb in the next few days.
The revulsion was so visceral against the real IRA that they practically went out of business themselves.
The tragedy in Omagh and the controversy surrounding it still run deep to this day, making this a crime that shook Britain. The quaint market town of Omagh lies just over an hour west of Belfast in Northern Ireland.
It was never really one of those places that you felt scared or that you saw evidence of the Troubles, really. It was a small, quiet little market town and everyone seemed to get on.
For decades, the people of Northern Ireland have had to live through an age of terror known as the Troubles.
The division in Northern Ireland is a classic politico-ethnic division. The best part of 60 years, the British government allowed Northern Ireland to be run by the Unionists, and the Unionist government ran the place in such a way as to exclude the nationalist minority, Catholic, nationalist, Republican, until the whole place exploded in 1969.
What followed was one of the largest conflicts in the history of the United Kingdom, with residents from both sides of the divide affected by the relentless battling and bloodshed.
For 40 years, every child here knew the sound of a bomb, and some children could tell you the difference between an AK-47 and a British SA-80. The nationalists want to unite with the rest of the people in Ireland and be governed as a single entity in the island, whereas the Unionists feel they will be overwhelmed in such a government and that their only security of maintaining themselves as an entity is the union with Britain. And if that union is threatened, they believe they will be overwhelmed.
Remarkably though, a political milestone was reached in the spring of 1998, which was to change everything.
We had the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in April, which I think set a lot of people's minds at ease that here at last we don't need to worry anymore about bombings or shootings. We've got peace, and that's, as parents, that's what we were very happy about, the fact that we didn't need to worry about our children when they went out.
4 months on from this historical landmark, the people of Omagh were enjoying a summer's weekend. Suzanne Travis was back home on a break from university.
For some reason, we must have had a lazy morning and we just took our time. We had to go to town that day because my mum was taking me into the travel agents to get my ticket to go back to Liverpool in September. And so we decided that we would just go in the afternoon that day.
We done the shopping, we came back home, and when I came into the kitchen, I said to my wife, "Is Aidan up yet?" And she says, "Oh yes, he's upstairs changing his clothes to go down the town to buy a pair of jeans."
My eldest son, Clive, and I, we played in a pipe band. On Saturday, we went to Glasgow and we were competing. Everything was going fine, beautiful day. A lot of people from the Omagh area were there, and we were talking to a lot of people.
As Stanley prepared for the competition, his wife Anne was back in their hometown, getting ready for a shift at the local clothes shop. Meanwhile, Michael, Suzanne and their families settled into their weekend. And Omagh was gradually filling with people. With 2 weeks left of the summer holidays and a festival parade later that day, the town was bustling.
He said he was going to pick up his friend and go down the town and buy the jeans. I even remember telling him where to park the car so that it would be the handiest to the town centre. I always remember as he walked up the hall for the last time, he looked back and he says, "I won't be long."
We went into town. The first place we went was the travel agent, and we booked my ticket. Then I remember we went into a clothes shop and my mum bought me a few bits and pieces for going back to college.
As Suzanne and her mum strolled around the shops, Aidan and his friend arrived in town. As Market Street began to fill with shoppers, Anne was busy at work when some terrifying news triggered a chain of events that would change Omagh forever.
The police came in and told them to get out because there was a bomb. There was a bomb near the courthouse. So Anne and Geraldine, they walked down the town. And normally they would go down to the back of the car parks.
We went over to a cafe, and it was while we were having our lunch in the cafe that the police came in. I remember them being very panicked and said, "You know, you've got to get out, everybody out now. There's a bomb in the town."
The time is just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
We followed the crowd. The police were telling us to walk down to the bottom of the street, but people were very calm, you know, nobody was panicking. I think we probably knew that we thought we were safe, you know, that we were out of danger, and the police had directed us down that end of the town. The length of time we were stood there, I think, started to become a worry for my mum. And I remember her turning around to me at one point and saying, "You know, Suzanne, I think should we just walk on now, because they're not going to let anyone back up the town. We'll go and make our way home from there." She no sooner had the words out than it just went off.
Omagh, Northern Ireland. A bomb scare has put the town on high alert. As officers rush to move locals to an area of safety, a massive explosion is about to rip through the heart of the bustling shopping area. Michael Gallagher is working nearby in his garage.
I was underneath the car when I heard a very loud explosion. I knew by the nature of this it was a long, rumbling, vibrating noise. I knew from previous experience of the bombings that I'd heard in the past that it was a bomb. So, you know, you just think for a minute, and then I thought, I better go home.
The first thing I remember was completely being covered in rubble. My initial reaction was, I need to get it off my face. I could hear screaming and I could hear alarms going off, and I could see this person lying next to me who was obviously dead. At that point, I just wanted to know where my mum was.
I got home, I found my wife was starting to get quite hysteric. The new Eden was downtown, and I said, you know, the bomb will not be in the town, or if it's in the town will be evacuated.
I met a few people from the city to me, "Stanley, did you hear there's been a bomb in Omagh?" I says, "No," I says, "I heard nothing."
We lived quite close to the town, and then shortly heard the helicopter. We put on the TV and it said that there had been a serious bomb explosion in Omagh town centre and there was casualties. I decided then to go to the hospital rather than the town centre.
As emergency services rushed to the scene on Market Street, Michael desperately began his search for his only son.
And when I arrived at the hospital entrance, there was so many people. There was an enormous amount of people, mainly with head injuries. Some people were sitting, some people were just standing about. I didn't know the hospital that well. I just went into every room looking for Aidan.
No one was expecting anything like that. Also, August is a big holiday time. A lot of our staff were off on leave. We had a weekend cover. You didn't really have time to activate things, so the casualties were arriving. Of course, people were just coming up in all sorts of vehicles.
I didn't realise that the operating theatre was on the first floor. And I went into the theatre. It was just horrible. There were so few people in the hospital working and so many casualties. And I went through every part of the hospital and I couldn't find Aidan.
Tyrone County A&E was now flooding with casualties and concerned relatives as weekend staff tried to take the strain of the disaster unfolding.
There was a lot of shrapnel wounds from the car bomb, and lots of people had serious multiple fractures. We had people with really severe burns, people with major eye injuries, and lots of people who had amputations.
Meanwhile, on Market Street, the scale of the catastrophic explosion was unfolding by the minute. The 500-pound bomb had been detonated in a vehicle at the bottom of the busiest street in the town, in the location where everybody had been evacuated to.
I could see my mum in the distance and I thought, right, I've got to get to her. And so your initial reaction is just to push yourself up off the ground. And I didn't have the strength to do it. And it was then that I looked down and just saw that my foot was just not there anymore. And I hadn't felt a thing.
Suzanne had been stood close to the blast and was badly injured. In the carnage, she was rescued from the rubble.
I knew that I was losing a lot of blood. I thought, I just don't want to die, I'm going to die. This is it now, you know, I just thought, I just wanted to go to sleep. But then the doctor came and he rushed me down to theatre.
As doctors examine the extent of Suzanne's injuries, she remains unaware of her mother's fate. With no news from the hospital, Michael Gallagher decides to retrace Aidan's steps.
I decided then to go to the place where I told him to park the car, and that was a point that I knew that we were in serious trouble. One of the cars was Aidan's, and I knew that if Aidan could have walked or phoned, he would have contacted us to let us know where he was. I almost collapsed at that point.
As Michael's desperation intensifies, Stanley and his son, almost 200 miles away in Scotland, were trying to reach family and friends back home.
I never thought once that Anne would be at the bottom of the town. I was beginning to worry because I says, you know, I mean, there's definitely somebody in here that I know. And this guy came over and he says, don't want to alarm you, but he says, I think maybe your sister, Rosemary, who was a traffic warden, has been killed or injured.
We then went back to the hospital, and in one of the wards, we found Aidan's friend, Michael. He was very, very badly burnt, and I asked him where Aidan was, and he says the last thing he remembers is we're both walking down the middle of the road, and they were joking and saying, you know, we need to get out of here. It was like the shop front just exploded and he was thrown through the air. That was the last he remembers.
As the evening drew in, pressure mounted to catch the perpetrators, and the Chief Constable of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, Ronald Flanagan, publicly and very definitely laid the blame with one group.
I was there that day, and I want nothing more than to bring to justice those who committed this terrible crime. The sadness is, of course, we know who committed this crime.
3 warnings were given prior to the explosion, to Ulster Television, the police and the Samaritans, but each call led to confusion.
They mentioned the courthouse in 2 of the phone calls. The phone calls were certainly not clear. They were deceptive. They didn't in any way aid the police to find the bomb.
Officers were led to believe the bomb was going to be planted at the courthouse.
They tried to clear the street as best they could. The result was complete and utter tragedy. People were actually moved with the best intentions towards the bomb car.
As people tried to absorb this and find their loved ones, many relatives still had no definite news hours after the blast.
Everybody was so worried. Somebody said, listen, your sister's not dead. She's been hurt, she's been injured in the bomb. My brother, he talked to me on the phone and he said, Anne's missing. There's no way that Anne would leave anybody in any doubt that she was okay. So I went to pieces and naturally enough, and I just couldn't think straight.
Anne McComb was now missing, having evacuated her place of work. As Stanley tried to take in the news, staff at Tyrone County Hospital were drawing up measures to cope with the sheer volume of people.
Nursing staff from all over Northern Ireland appeared. If they'd been in the area, they just came. We were told that to try and ease the pressure on the hospital itself because it was being overwhelmed, that they would open the leisure centre to deal with relatives. So we were able to redirect everyone.
There was lots and lots of people there. At one stage, I went up to the police and I said, you know, we've heard a lot about the injured because the lists were coming in, the people have been transferred to different hospitals. Surely you must have some news about the deceased.
I think it was around 11 o'clock. Clive was with me when I took the call. Just confirmed then they identified Anne at the morgue. Clive knew. I didn't have to say anything. I mean, I can see it now, it was the worst moment in my life.
It must have been about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. I was taken into a room and there was a policeman and a policewoman. They started asking me questions and I just knew by the nature of the questions they were asking that it wasn't going to be a happy outcome. And at the end of that process, they said, we have somebody answering that description. We're going to ask you to go to the temporary mortuary. I had to go home and tell Patsy and Sharon and Kathy that Aidan wouldn't be coming home. I couldn't even say the words. We just hugged each other and cried.
Mindless, evil people who do not care about the lives of this generation or the future generations. We will defeat them.
The quaint market town of Omagh has just been the target of one of the largest terrorist attacks ever to hit Northern Ireland. A car bomb has ripped through the heart of the main street, leaving utter devastation in its wake. With the casualty numbers rising, the local hospital is under enormous pressure. Suzanne Travis's injuries are so severe, doctors have to transfer her for further treatment.
I remember the consultant coming over to me and he said, we're going to have to ask you to sign this consent form to say that we can amputate more of your leg because the wound you've received is messy and we need to stop the bleeding straight away. So I had to sign that form then that night to give them permission to take more of my leg away.
As Suzanne tried to come to terms with the extent of her injuries, she was still unaware of her mother's whereabouts. Meanwhile, police were faced with a crime scene stretching almost 300 metres, as well as hundreds of severely injured people.
The golden hour period is anything from the incident happening right through, shall we say, for the next 48 hours as being a very crucial period from the point of view of identifying where those people that had carried out the atrocity had gone to ground, where they had abandoned vehicles, and identifying the scene location where the device may have been put together. Obviously, securing forensic evidence that would have been on the people themselves before clothing was abandoned or destroyed, or any telephones or any other material that would have been there that could have been helpful to the investigation.
As emergency services began the long and painful clear-up operation, political leaders from around the world went on record to declare war on terrorism.
Two governments will work together and will do everything that is possible within their power to hunt down those that have been responsible for this outrage.
In the immediate aftermath of the Omagh bomb, both the British and Irish governments, Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern, were absolutely horrified.
These evil people, these mindless people who do not care about the lives of this generation and the future generations, that we will defeat them.
They believed that perhaps the real IRA had succeeded in spooking unionists and saying, how can you sit down with these people? They're the same as the people who detonated the bomb. Things haven't changed at all. It's made no difference. So the two governments immediately came together to try to calm unionist fears. They pulled out all the stops, bringing over Bill Clinton, and they visited the scene, they talked to people. Tony Blair, Bertie Ahern, all went to Omagh and toured around, desperately anxious to tell people, look, this is a one-off.
We were told by the police that no stone will be left unturned. Those people responsible will be brought before the courts and dealt with.
With assurances flooding in, the families of the deceased and those injured took some comfort in the promises made by the political leaders.
It was this group that had opposed the Good Friday Agreement. This was an act of madness to draw attention to their dissatisfaction with the way things were going.
72 hours after the attack, the real IRA claimed responsibility.
In the end, the revulsion was so visceral against the real IRA that they practically went out of business themselves on a voluntary basis. Very shortly after this, they announced that there was going to be a ceasefire. Because they knew they had no support. They knew if anybody could get their hands on them, they'd tear them apart because of the dreadful scenes of carnage that were broadcast all over the world.
This was the deadliest terrorist attack.
Northern Ireland is in a state of shock this morning.
The bombing had quickly become global news, and sympathy poured in as the residents of Omagh tried to rebuild their broken town. For Suzanne, her torment continued.
I was in intensive care, and I remember saying to Dad, you know, what about Mum, and you know, what's happened to Mum? And he said that she'd also been to theatre that night, that she'd had a severe leg injury and an arm injury as well. She'd had operations on both of those. And he said that her eye was badly damaged. He then told me she hadn't woken up after her operation. It was a week before we knew then that she had come out of the coma. We were just all so relieved then, you know, that she was awake.
The road to recovery would be long and painful for Suzanne and her mother. They were among over 250 people injured in the blast. 31 victims, including a pregnant woman and her 2 unborn children, lost their lives. An arduous task now lay ahead for the police. The real IRA had claimed responsibility, but no individuals were being held accountable.
Within the first 3 weeks of the investigation, had fairly well established who the main suspects were.
By the following month, 12 men were hunted down and arrested, and key suspects began to feature. Republicans Liam Campbell, Seamus Daly, Michael McKevitt, Seamus McKenna, and Colin Murphy, all alleged members of the dissident group the Real IRA. And more information was to come.
Something close to 6 million telephonic records had to be searched so to itemise out or identify those calls that had been made to, as it were, the mobile phones that were used by those that were planting the device. The guards were fairly content that they had determined where the device had been put together, where they had gone from, where the car had been prepared and laid up, and how it had been taken across the border, the route that it had followed down to Omagh, and again the route that they had followed to get back across the border again.
Evidence showing that the terrorists had travelled across the border meant police forces on both sides, the Garda Síochána in the Republic and the Royal Ulster Constabulary in the north, began their own investigations.
We feel that there should have been not 2 separate investigations, but a joint investigation. That was not the case. These were 2 parallel investigations, and very often one side didn't know what the other was doing because of the lack of trust.
The involvement of 2 police forces should have created some unity, but in reality it was fraught with problems. Following the initial arrest of 12 men, all were released through lack of evidence, and the investigation teams pressed on with limited leads. But 5 months later came the first breakthrough. The police charged Colin Murphy for conspiracy. Despite the possible breakthrough with Murphy's trial, the process was slow, and 2 years on from the massacre, victims and relatives were frustrated. But allegations in a television programme were to turn the whole investigation upside down.
It was totally incredible. We knew that government couldn't sit back after this because there were so many startling revelations.
These fresh allegations called British intelligence into question, claiming that they had the capability of tapping into live telephone conversations.
That was the first time that we knew about GCHQ, the government intelligence listening station. That's the first time we knew they were involved in any degree in the Omagh bombing. In fact, they had monitored a number of the phones, including mobile phones, that the bomb team that delivered the bomb to Omagh were using.
The capacity to monitor telephone calls has been there for a decade or 2 or more, you know. But what exactly was being monitored and monitored by whom and to what extent, I have no knowledge in that respect. It's never been conclusively confirmed.
Whenever these telephones became live, GCHQ could then track them. This didn't just happen in Omagh, this happened in some of the previous bombings. We just couldn't understand if they had that degree of capability, why it was not used, first of all, to try and stop the bombers, and secondly, if that wasn't possible, to apprehend them at a very early stage.
This new information was damning, and intelligence obtained did suggest they were listening in to the suspects on the day of the attack. But what was heard, and whether it could have made a difference, remains a mystery. In addition to this, was yet another accusation.
The British intelligence overlooking Northern Ireland and not telling the police force there what was happening.
If truth lay within these allegations, detectives hunting the bombers had never been passed the information, potentially hindering the investigation once more. But why had such crucial evidence not been shared?
Because of their rules and regulations, they did not share with the detectives. They shared it with Special Branch, but Special Branch did not have the authorisation to share that with the senior investigating officer that was investigating the Omagh bomb.
Angry is probably far too polite a word. We were mad, actually. We were raging.
With the criminal trial of Colin Murphy ongoing and no other convictions made, some angered relatives and victims took the matter into their own hands and launched civil action against key suspects, whose names had now been rumoured to be linked to the atrocity for years. Liam Campbell, Seamus Daly, Michael McKevitt, Seamus McKenna and Colin Murphy.
As part of that civil action, there had to be a survey carried out of all the telephone networks, and then this is where we as families learned that this information was available.
As relatives searched through piles of potential evidence for their civil case, another blow was to test their resilience once more.
Everybody I chased was not ordinary criminals. We're all connected with the IRA. And at this stage, the real IRA had started. So this guy was basically a big bomb maker. That's all we ever done, made bombs. And I knew what he was doing. So I would give it to my handlers. I don't know where the bomb's going. There'll be a bomb in the next few days.
"250 victims have been wounded and 31 people murdered in a bomb explosion in Omagh, Northern Ireland. Despite assurances that the perpetrators will be caught, the police investigation has been dogged by rumours of mismanagement and a failure to act upon key evidence. 2 years on, one man, Colin Murphy, is on trial, but nothing else has materialised. Now an IRA agent has come forward with a claim that could throw an already fraught investigation into turmoil.
I met him just before the Omagh bombing. I would say to my handlers, he's mixing, because I knew, because I mean, I'd basically worked with the guy for fucking 8-9 years.
An agent who goes by the name of Kevin Fulton worked for the British Army, spending decades infiltrating the IRA and working alongside terrorists. His role was to relay vital information back to the authorities. Despite the risks, he came forward with alarming news.
I knew what he was doing, so I would give it to my handlers. I don't know where the bomb's going. There'll be a bomb in the next few days. I said, listen, there's something big going down because they're mixing at night.
Although the location was unclear, Fulton claimed he knew of a device being primed to be taken north of the border. This extremely serious allegation led to the entire police investigation being scrutinised.
It seemed to me that this suggestion that the bomb might have been prevented would cause immense pain, and they had the right to know whether that was true or not. The other thing was that if it were true, it would have undermined the Royal Ulster Constabulary. And if it were not true, then, the good officers would be tarnished by an untrue allegation.
Baroness O'Lone was the police ombudsman for Northern Ireland, an impartial body that investigated complaints against the force. Her team called upon the Royal Ulster Constabulary and began investigating Fulton's claims.
The Chief Constable assured me of every cooperation. But the reality was, whilst we got cooperation from some officers, we didn't get cooperation from others in matters of intelligence, which is a very sensitive area. We brought computer experts over to sit down at the intelligence computers, and we found a completely separate system with further information in which had not been brought to our attention. The police themselves had started a review of the Omagh investigation. One of the things that he'd looked at was the intelligence picture around the Omagh bombing, and this wasn't disclosed to us at all.
Delving into this undisclosed intelligence was to reveal some of the most damning information ever to come to light.
I found in it information about a telephone call which had been received on the 4th of August 1998. That was just 11 days before the Omagh bomb exploded. And it said that there would be an attack on police in Omagh on the 15th of August. And that had never been made public. Nobody knew about it. This was a long and detailed conversation, and it actually named names and places, and it talked about an attack with weapons.
Separate to Fulton's claim, evidence of this prior telephone warning was hard to comprehend. The Ombudsman requested why this information had not been acted upon.
The officer who received the telephone call on the 4th of August had acted properly. He'd gone immediately to Special Branch, telling them and taking the content of a 10-minute telephone call, and the subdivisional commander did not know that there had been a threat of an attack on police in his district. Why didn't they act on it? Why didn't they tell? I do not know to this day.
As the investigation deepened, the actions of some officers became more confusing. One common trait was now emerging: the lack of shared information.
This officer told us that had he known about the information of the 15th of August, there was nothing which he would have done differently. But he had earlier indicated that he would have put roadblocks around the small number of roads which allowed access to Omagh. There was a requirement that the district commander be told of a threat to his area. And there was a threat book in which these threats were recorded in each police station. But the threat book was missing and was never found.
The Ombudsman also found some of the force's special branch uncooperative.
They do work together, but they didn't all share things. I mean, it's come out in the Ombudsman's report, but I mean, it's actually twice as bad as even the Ombudsman's report makes out.
We looked at some 300 pieces of intelligence which would have been relevant to the investigation in Omagh, and we found that 78% of them had not been passed to the investigating officers. 22% had.
Well, I think Omagh was a watershed for the police services on both sides of the border, that informal ad hoc arrangements were totally insufficient.
There were officers who cooperated so fully and told us everything they knew, and there were so many of them who have said, we knew that Special Branch had information but weren't giving it to us. The investigation was profoundly flawed.
Formalisation needed to take place, the legislation, but procedures were adopted by the police service, the exchanges of information, that you had to harmonise communications.
And we made recommendations for the appointment of an independent senior investigating officer and a new investigation.
As a result, these fresh findings fed into an ongoing review into the handling of the crime. And further proof was to substantiate the claims made by ex-IRA informant Kevin Fulton.
My handler, I knew he did everything by the book, and that's it. I knew there was an attack was going to be imminent in the next 3 days, because you always use your bomb in 3 days because the fertiliser, the mix is fresh.
Kevin Fulton's information on its own couldn't have prevented the bomb. In combination with the other intelligence and information which was available, who can say?
It actually proved that, yes, I did give the information exactly as I said I'd give it. She found that it actually gave me my credibility, but it also proved that I was telling the truth.
With the damning report complete, Nuala alone had the difficult task of informing the victims and relatives of her findings.
We were reassured that everything was going to be done. The truth was really completely the opposite story.
It was the most difficult thing I've ever done in my professional career. The findings were so bad, the issues were so big, and I had hundreds of bereaved, injured, traumatised victims and relatives to deal with.
The sad thing is the vast majority of people out there never get to see this material. They only see the headlines in the newspaper.
The Ombudsman's report provoked controversy throughout the UK, not least within some parts of the RUC. With 6 recommendations made, the response from the Chief Constable Ronald Flanagan was extraordinary.
As a result of a rigorous, fair investigation, I would not only resign, I would go and publicly commit suicide.
He was almost in denial. So it was a very difficult period for the families. The Ombudsman was saying one thing and the Chief Constable was saying the other. But in the end, the families learned the truth, that the police investigation had failed.
With the original investigation begging so many questions, confidence in obtaining any criminal conviction was now at an all-time low. But the following month brought the first victory.
Mr. Murphy,
Judgment was passed.
after considering all the evidence, I hereby sentence you to...
Murphy got 14 years.
After a trial that lasted over 3 years, one of the original suspects, Colin Murphy, was found guilty of conspiracy to cause the Omagh bombing. But this justice was short-lived.
He appealed it on a technicality, and he walked free. He walked free.
This devastating blow came in 2005, after Murphy had been incarcerated for just 3 years. 5 years later, his sentence would be quashed altogether. Further reports and investigations were to follow the Ombudsman's, each looking into the failures since the tragedy. In 2006, a new suspect was charged, this time with murder, triggering one of the biggest trials in UK legal history. Colin Murphy's nephew, Sean Hoey, was considered to be involved in relation to DNA found on the timer for the bomb.
After considering all the evidence brought before me, I hereby find the defendant not guilty.
56 charges were brought against Hoey, but in a spectacular court case, every single one was dropped and the case was thrown out,
You may now leave the court.
making Hoey a free man.
Which in my eyes was a shamble, a disgrace to British justice.
But the families and victims continued their fight. It would be 2 years later when they would make legal history with the civil case they had launched years earlier.
This is the first time anywhere in the world the victims' families have sued terrorists. It broke new legal ground. The civil lawsuit is a much lower burden of proof, 51% as opposed to 98% in criminal prosecution. That was the only option that we had, was to sue for money, basically. In the end, we got a judgment against 4 of the 5 that we sued.
Thank you. 2 members of the family have agreed to make statements, so there'll be no questions, please.
I think it is a tremendous moral victory for our families. We would like to thank the police in both Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, our legal team, and the wider community for all their support. Thank you.
In a landmark victory, Michael McKevitt, Liam Campbell, Colin Murphy and Seamus Daly were found responsible for the terrorist attack on Omagh. Seamus McKenna was cleared of all charges. The families sued those responsible for up to £1.4 million in damages, to be awarded from their assets.
At last, these people have been held to account. Maybe they'll not go to jail, but at least there's been a court case. A judge has listened to the evidences and he has found a judgment against these people.
But for those grieving, the fight is far from over. New evidence uncovered by legal teams representing some of the families could finally be the breakthrough for a public inquiry that they have longed for.
I have a right as a citizen, a British citizen, to know why my wife was murdered in Omagh. When there was peace in Northern Ireland, why was all this allowed to happen? I need an answer.
A handful of suspects have now been held accountable for injuring hundreds of people and for the murder of 31 victims on that August day in 1998. But not one criminal conviction has yet been successful.
I wasn't going to allow these people to stop me from doing what I wanted to do before this had happened to me. So I graduated with all of my friends. I got a teaching job in Liverpool. All of a sudden, my life turned a corner, really, and started to enjoy things again, and ended up meeting Martin, my husband, and we now have a little girl. So a lot of positives have come out of what happened.
For Michael and Stanley, their fight continues, knowing that the pain caused by their loss may never go away.
Anne was always smiling, always looking her best. And there was only one Anne.
If I was to sit down and think about all of that, I really don't think I could get up again. It's too painful just to think that you brought somebody up to be a good, decent member of society, member of your family, just for no reason to be not here. We believed that our children would be burying us. The only conclusion that I can come to is there are people in high places who are protecting those who were responsible for the Omagh bomb.
We have the determination, not just here, but in the Irish Republic too, to take whatever measures we can to bring those responsible for justice. And more than that, we have a political process that has the overwhelming support of the majority of people everywhere.
Together, people and leaders are moving Northern Ireland from the deep freeze of despair to the warm sunlight of peace.
On the afternoon of Friday, the 12th of February 1993, a 2-year-old boy disappears from a shopping centre in Bootle, near Liverpool.
All I knew was my boy was missing and I wanted him back so much.
His name is James Bulger.
We had this unique and bizarre phenomenon of those chilling images of a child being led away by the hand by older children.
I do recall watching CCTV and I knew straight away it was James.
Despite a mass search to find him, nobody could have predicted the horrific outcome.
They were able to get him onto the railway line, where they did the most unspeakable things to him.
And the circumstances surrounding James's tragic death were incomprehensible.
There's no way 2 10-year-olds could have harmed a 2-year-old. You know, it's just impossible.
It was clear that this was something that no one else had ever encountered before in this country.
A murder so evil, it ignited an unprecedented wave of fury throughout the nation, making this a crime that shook Britain. Friday afternoon in Bootle, Merseyside. Denise Bulger, her son James and her friend arrive at the Strand shopping centre.
Denise was in the habit of going to the New Strand because there was a handy bus from Kirby that took her to Bootle. It was indoors and she's got a small child, so it's also convenient for that.
Denise spends time walking around the Strand before visiting a butcher's with her son.
James was with her as they went into the shop, and she was choosing whatever cuts of meat it was that she wanted.
The young mother has only been in the shop a matter of minutes.
While she was concentrating on that and getting her money out of her purse and so forth, she was distracted for a matter of a few seconds.
In those few seconds, James disappears from the shop, and Denise's life is to change forever.
Children do run off. The thing is, it's quite a popular area for children, and it wouldn't seem strange that they would have seen this boy running around.
The shopping centre security staff initially put a routine call-out for any sightings of the toddler. A child wandering off or getting lost was not uncommon. But when no information feeds back, Merseyside police are quickly drafted in.
We were told that James had gone with his mother and her friend to a butcher's, and that James had somehow run out. They went looking for him and just couldn't find him. And they searched everywhere, of course. She was panicking, just general searching for the young boy.
As each minute passes without James, the search intensifies to try and locate him in or around the shopping centre.
It wouldn't have entered your mind that he'd have been taken by anybody. But all they were concerned was for his safety and where he was. Because it was a busy road and he could have easily been knocked over.
Despite hope that James may have strayed off only to be found, the little toddler is nowhere to be seen, and the hours begin to pass by. Officers make the decision to widen their search.
We search near canals, because you always think he might have fallen in. We go and search derelict yards, scrap areas. It's a quite industrial area. It was such a vast area to sort of search, really.
Meanwhile, Denise is taken to Marsh Lane Police Station.
I had police walk in the room and holding a pair of shoes in front of my face, and I was shaking my head, no, not his. And that was a sigh of, you know, kind of relief then when them shoes weren't James's.
We just hoped that if he got abducted, that he'd be found alive. And that's, well, we had to be positive, and we tried to put that sort of feeling within ourselves. You try and glean as much information from locals, whether they've seen the boy, have they seen anything suspicious? It was the length of time that we were concerned about. The more time went on, you were concerned for his safety then, because 24 hours is a long time for a young, not quite 3-year-old boy.
Yet the painful hours without James drag through into the following day. Denise and her family remain at the police station, frantic with worry, when officers believe they may have their first major lead.
We've shown a clip of 2 boys, what appeared to be in each other's company, with one holding James, what looked like the taller of the 2. And we assessed the ages to be about 14, 15. Although it wasn't clear, because the films get turned over by day, it's poor visibility.
There were young children seen with James, and unfortunately the CCTV images were, of course, quite indistinct.
And I knew straight away it was James. I thought, I've got a perfect chance of getting him back here. There was words going around that they could be classing him as a brother, you know, a brother that they've wanted, and they've probably got him in a shed somewhere feeding him sweets and looking after him.
Denise tries to take some comfort in the knowledge that her son could be in the company of other children.
It gave me a lot of hope, because them days, you know, you didn't think that a child could hurt or harm another child. So I did believe I was going to get him back safe and sound.
Grainy images from the shopping centre security cameras reveal James walking away from the butcher's shop with 2 young boys. But the quality of the footage is too poor to identify either one. James has now been missing for over 24 hours. Officers call upon the media and appeal to the public for any information.
If you've got me baby, just bring them back.
It fairly quickly on the Saturday became clear that it wasn't going to be quickly resolved because he hadn't been found.
Just buying meat out the butcher's, turned away from for a minute, and then I looked down and he's gone.
Despite the press conference and CCTV images, no further news filters through. All the Bulger family can do is pray their son will be found safe.
These boys had taken James, it appeared, from the New Strand. Were they playing some kind of game with him, perhaps? Was he being held hostage, or was he being kept by them somewhere as a playmate? Or had some harm been done to him?
We had these 2 boys and we had to find them. It was assessed that we had to look for boys within an age range of 10 to 18, but we concentrated more or less looking at boys who were about 14, because that's what appeared on the screen. You interviewed local police officers and asked them who did they suspect that would be these children. I was unfortunately in an area where a lot of children were always in trouble, and there was a lot of names put forward.
He wasn't with me, and I wanted him back so much, and we were pleading for these 2 boys to bring him back.
But despite the appeals and residents across the borough pulling together to search for James, the following day brings tragic news.
I just remember Albert Kirby coming in and telling me the worst news I could possibly get.
Protected under a police tent lies the body of a young boy, found this afternoon by children playing on a railway embankment.
Denise Bulger and her family have been living their worst nightmare. Their only son, James, has gone missing whilst on a shopping trip, apparently being led away by 2 young boys. Despite extensive searches, Merseyside police received crushing news 2 days after his disappearance.
James' body was found on a Sunday afternoon on the railway line.
I lived under a black veil for a long time after that. Couldn't see beyond that, couldn't hear anything, didn't want to hear anything, didn't want to see anyone. Just wanted to shelter myself away from everyone, just wanted to be left alone. Couldn't believe what I was getting told. And I still believed at that time, you know, James was going to come walking through the door. Thought it was just the worst nightmare I was living.
We then faced with the prospect that, you know, what the reality is that we've got a manhunt for 2 small children, unprecedented, unfathomable, and that's what the police are dealing with, that's what the press are dealing with, and we had to report it. It was and remains, you know, the most astonishing story that I've ever had to cover.
James is found more than 48 hours after disappearing from his mother's side. He is just weeks away from his 3rd birthday.
They were found by children, not by adults. And those kids must be still affected today as a result of what they saw.
James is discovered with the most horrific injuries. As his family are given the devastating details, the nation pulls together to hunt for the boys from the CCTV, to try and uncover the circumstances surrounding his death.
That moved the story to a new depth, shall we say, of shock and dismay, and by now the world's press were descending on Liverpool and the eyes of the world were on Liverpool.
Emphasis is now placed on the grainy images of the boys James was last seen with.
We spent some time trying to help enhance the CCTV images because the police at that time didn't have the computer technology that we in the media had.
We'd never thought that the injuries that James had on him were committed by 2 10-year-old boys. We were still looking at age range 14 to 18, you know, evil sort of children that could have committed it.
Merseyside police are faced with limited leads. Along with a continued appeal for information, they release details on James's last steps.
From where James was abducted to where he was found, it must be nearly 3 miles. A long way to walk a young child. But where James was found, they had to climb up the side of a railway bridge, which was very near to Walton Lane police station. And in fact, in the police station, you can actually see the railway line.
And the address?
Information from the public floods in, and less than a week after James's disappearance, officers are given crucial details that lead them to the doors of 2 young boys.
Cheers, thank you.
I was called to brief officers to arrest 2 young boys. One had been seen to have paint on his shoes.
Paint, along with other items, had been found at the scene of the crime.
A woman had come forward to say that she knew this boy and that there was certain paint which sort of was connected with the paint that had been found on James. So I sent officers out to arrest Venables and myself went down to arrest Thompson.
Can we have a few words?
Robert Thompson and John Venables are 2 10-year-olds from Merseyside, thought to be truanting from school on the day James went missing.
A team of us went to Thompson's home. I had to actually get on my knees to be level-headed with him, sort of face to face, and told him what I was there for and the fact I was arresting him. And then he started crying. But it wasn't tears there. They were crocodile tears. I was taken aback a bit.
Take this a bit farther, please.
Both Thompson and Venables are taken to separate police stations to be questioned.
After the second interview, he actually admitted that Venables had grabbed hold of James's hand. And then he went on, it was like stopping, starting. Yeah, I admit going so far with him, then I left him. And then when we produced other evidence, well, you've been seen on the reservoir talking to an old woman. Oh yes, after that, we just left him after that. And then, well, you've been seen after that. Yeah, well, once I'd been there, I left him there. And then subsequently, we got onto the railway line. And that's the investigation, so the questioning was regarding that. He denied doing anything, but blamed it on Venables. And of course, we heard that Venables was blaming everything on Thompson.
Lawrence Lee was John Venables' solicitor at the time.
He was a little boy. Butter wouldn't melt. There was no way that you'd have thought that he'd committed a murder. My feelings began to change after the second interview, because in the first interview he just went on about how he'd been in a part of the city well away from the Strand. And then he said, "We weren't in the Strand, we never grabbed a kid, Mum." And I thought, oh my God, and the walls were caving in at that point. I went home, watched the CCTV footage, and I could clearly see that little boy being walked out of the shopping precinct by two boys, one of whom, which looked like Venables, wearing a mustard-coloured coat, clearly mustard-coloured. So I couldn't wait to get in there the next morning, and I threw the door open and I said to him, first thing I said to him, "What colour's your coat?" And he said, "Mustard." And my heart just sank. I just knew, what am I in? I felt absolutely sick to my stomach.
I had to go through stages with Thompson. He was quite clever, and no doubt, in my mind, he was the leader of the two. He was feeding Venables what to do. When we interviewed Thompson initially, he denied everything. We had to drip feed him with all the evidence that we had. But once we got to a sensitive point, one thing that Thompson did, and that gave away the fact that he was lying, when you give him a sensitive question, he shuffled his feet under the chair. They just didn't want to put themselves on that railway line because they knew exactly what they'd done.
Specially trained officers spend hours questioning the two boys and eventually are given news that is to stun the nation.
John made an admission, and his admission was, "I'm sorry, we did kill James. Please tell his mum I'm sorry."
John Venables, a 10-year-old boy, uttered the words nobody had dared to believe. A child had admitted to killing another child. Meanwhile, Robert Thompson gives a different story.
Thompson told me the fact that he'd taken James with Venables, although blaming it on Venables, of course, took him all the way to the railway line. The assaulter took part. He was there at the initial stage, but he left. There was a lot of facts against both of them. He's admitted being there at the scene. He said that Venables had done most of the injuries, whereas I believe differently.
Rounded off with a fight.
And once you got enough evidence by an interview to charge him, you charge him.
Along with the confession from Venables, compelling evidence from the scene also links the boys to the murder. And the horrific facts that emerge surrounding James's final hours are unbearable to hear.
They're dragging him through the streets and pretending to be his brother. When they're challenged by, it is said, 38 individuals, either saw him with them and some of them challenged Thompson and Venables as to what was going on and why the child was crying. They had a ready story to hand. Oh, he's fallen over, that's why. He's got injuries on him. These are injuries that they'd inflicted. He's crying for his mother and we're taking him home to his mother, was the story they told. Very cunning, very knowing, ready with an excuse that could trick a significant number of adults. And they were able to get him onto the railway line where they did the most unspeakable things to him, inflicted the most unspeakable injuries. It must have been the most horrendous ordeal that the child went through. You just can't imagine it. And they then put his body on the railway line.
Most of the injuries inflicted on James by Thompson and Venables prior to his death are too disturbing to include in this programme.
There was no doubt they were trying to make the incident look as if it was an accident and that the train had killed James. They weren't clever enough to know that, modernised forensic would determine something else. That's how conniving they were.
And statements from witnesses reveal the cruel intentions both boys had from the outset.
Initially, they tried to push James in front of a vehicle outside the Strand. And they also tried to push him into a canal. So they were determined to kill James.
With the tragic facts laid bare, Robert Thompson and John Venables are charged with James Bulger's abduction and murder.
Two children acting in concert, abducting a child from a shopping centre in broad daylight, bringing him to his end in horrific circumstances, and then seeking to make it look like an accident. This is completely unprecedented. This is unique in recorded world history. There has never been a murder case quite like this one.
I thought, there's no way two 10-year-olds could have harmed a 2-year-old. You know, it's just impossible. But when I seen the faces on them, I did believe then that they could have done something, what they did do to them. There was a point where I didn't want to live anymore. I just wanted to end everything. If I couldn't have protected James, and I didn't want no one to protect me.
Merseyside police now face their rarest case in criminal history. 2 young boys charged with murder. As the nation mourns the loss of James, the public outpouring of grief and rage intensifies.
The first appearance in the juvenile court was mid-Feb, because I can never forget that day and the scenes outside the court.
Feelings were running incredibly high in Liverpool, in the world at that time, because it's a natural human reaction. We don't expect children to harm children in this way. And so there is some kind of innate human reaction against it, which in some people was demonstrated by wanting to go and stand outside Bootle Magistrates Court and act as a baying mob.
Two young boys from Merseyside have been charged with the murder of toddler James Bulger. As the public vent their anger and disgust, the victim's family try and prepare themselves for an unprecedented trial.
I just wanted to see them two going down for the crime that they committed.
Following the initial appearance at the Magistrates' Court in Bootle, just 10 days after James's death, the trial for the 2 children charged with murder is set for later that year and brings further torment.
I know they were only 10, but I don't care. They'd done the most horrendous thing to me. And more than anything, no one could hurt me other than that. I just wanted to see justice done for James.
There were queues outside the court because there were 44 seats available for the public to listen in, and they'd be queuing up all night to get in. It was just like a show trial. The dock was too low because they couldn't see over the rails, so the dock had to be raised by 18 inches. So they put a false floor in so they could see over the rails.
Your Honour. This is the most grave crime imaginable. I think it would be bizarre if we did not put criminals who carry out the most serious crimes above the age of 10 through a judicial process, because it would be an outrage to the public, really, if they were not seen to go through a proper judicial trial.
And should therefore tried as one.
There was never any question that this case had to be committed to the Crown Court, because nowadays they have a grave crime argument, and if a juvenile or a youth is involved in a crime that is grave, it has to go to the Crown. But the age of criminal responsibility is different in different countries, and at that time, in the whole of the British Isles, it was 10. It's right to be 10, and it was 10, and they had to be prosecuted.
In a highly charged environment, details leading up to the abduction of James are brought to the fore.
It was half-term, and John was put in charge of the school gerbils, and he was very excited about that, and he was on his way to school to pick them up. when he, by chance, bumped into Thompson, who said to him, let's go robbing, right? Not killing, let's go robbing. And they went off to the Strand and they were messing around. They had to be back at a certain point in Walton for 7 o'clock. I think John's mum was going to the video shop. And they were bored. And it was suggested by Robert, apparently, let's grab a kid. John Venables had abandoned his gerbils, gone with him, and they grabbed little James. And they walked him around for hours. They took a route through Everton. There was a lady with a dog, and they asked where the local police station was. And they could have gone into Walton Lane police station, and of course they didn't. And they took him up on the railway, and the rest is tragic history.
There has got to be some psychological analysis of a child of 10 to establish whether they fully were aware of the gravity of what they'd done. And I think with these two, I think they did know what they'd done was completely wrong. But I think they ended up feeling very sorry for themselves and not sorry for James and not sorry for the hurt and agony that it inflicted on his family. And the disturbing part about it is that they've never apologised to Denise or Ralph.
The high-profile trial of Thompson and Venables lasts 17 days, finally drawing to a dramatic conclusion.
The only time I did go to the court was the last day when I got to see the backs of their heads, and all I seen them was shoulders moving where they were sniggling. They showed no remorse whatsoever. I think if I'd have got hold of one of them that day, I think I would have done him harm.
I sat about 10 yards away from Venables and Thompson, and when it returned, when they said they were guilty, Venables knew straight away and started to cry. Thompson looked at me and just glared at me, and I just glared back at him. And then he realised that Venables was crying, so his behaviour changed and he started to cry, but I couldn't see any tears. That's how evil, in my mind, I thought Thompson was at that stage.
After the verdict is delivered, the judge takes the unusual step of revealing the identities of the young killers, along with details of their backgrounds. An unprecedented decision in British legal history.
Well, the judge is under an obligation. If he thinks that it's in the public interest to know the identity, then he has the power to reveal it. And he weighed up all the circumstances, because until now, Venables and Thompson had been boy A and boy B. I was always against their identity being revealed. Not because of John, I wasn't bothered one iota about John, but he had a family who was completely innocent, of course.
The names behind the faces are now in the public domain, but the decision is greeted with mixed feelings, and years later will require the killers to be given new identities at a considerable cost to the taxpayer. James's family now have to wait to find out how long his killers will be detained for.
At the end of that court case, I was believed that they were going to serve many, many years, which were the words of the judge.
Officers, take them down to the cells.
But the final tariff imposed on the convicted child murderers provokes huge political debate and sparks a national uproar that will continue for decades.
In the aftermath of the trial, of course, we had the judge setting the tariff that they were to serve 8 years.
I felt let down. I felt like I'd let James down. I thought it was a joke. I felt they were laughing at me, Thompson and Venables, and I felt Thompson and Venables were laughing at the government.
I certainly thought they would get 10 years. I thought 8 years was not enough because it was only going to bring them to 18, 19. Now, they were only going to be held in children's homes till they were 17. That would mean no real punitive nature to the sentence because they would never serve any time in an adult institution. It would simply be schooling in a special school, which was secure. I don't think that would or did serve the public interest. I think it was actually detrimental to them.
As Thompson and Venables adjust to life in separate young offenders institutes, their sentences are reviewed just 10 days after the trial by the Lord Chief Justice and increased from 8 to 10 years. But this does little to dampen the fury surrounding how long they will serve.
Everyone was in an uproar at the sentence that Thompson and Venables were given. You know, I can't thank people enough for the way they've still backed me to this day.
There was a huge outpouring of disbelief and calls for the sentence to be increased. There was a petition gathered through a national newspaper that was presented to Downing Street.
Hundreds of thousands of people signed up, and Michael Howard, who was the Home Secretary then of an outgoing Conservative government who wanted to appease the public, increased that tariff to 15 years.
In a landmark decision, the government listens to the swell of public opinion, with almost 280,000 people signing the petition to increase the killers' sentences. Thompson and Venables will now spend an extra 7 years without their freedom.
I wasn't pleased with it, but I would have learned to live with it. I would have said, well, you know, at the end of the day, they have done 15 years, or going to do 15 years, you know, you can't ask for more than that. Because I knew one day they would have had to walk again. You know, I didn't ask them to be locked up indefinitely.
This was something that we weren't involved in because we're criminal lawyers, we're not politicians. And they went to new lawyers to appeal to the High Court, but then they wanted to go to the European courts.
As representatives for the murderers hit back and quickly argue the decision, the new 15-year tariff is a short-lived victory. The House of Lords rule the increase as unlawful, and in a huge blow to James's family, decide to bring his killer's sentences back down.
When it got brought back down, when they said it wasn't down to Michael Howard to increase it, it was just another knife in the back. And I just thought, how much more can we take as James's family? It's just one hurt after the other. Once the 15 years was been up, you know, they could have walked and I wouldn't have been looking for them, no one else would have been looking for them. They certainly wouldn't have been looking over the shoulders waiting for an attack on them. Because at the end of the day, they would have served, you know, an adult sentence for a murder anyway.
As the custodial sentences for the youngest killers in the country become a political argument, the nation hope that the boys who committed such a horrific crime will be handed the necessary punishment and rehabilitation.
There has to be punishment, but within that punishment, there has to be rehabilitation because they can't be released into society unless they're sufficiently rehabilitated, unless they satisfy the parole board.
But despite the young criminals being housed in detention centres with strict rules and guidelines, Denise and her family receive information that brings little comfort.
I was getting drip-fed, if you like, bits of information of how they were getting rewarded on the inside, and I just thought, you know, what have I done to deserve this? You know, that they should be getting punished, not rewarded.
They're secure accommodation. Every door is locked after he goes into a certain part. But it's a bit like a hostel, if you like, as well. And they had full education, loads of good food, and he had television and videos and everything. He had a room that a lot of poor kids would be very jealous of.
The cost of a place at a secure unit can be over £200,000 a year per inmate. Under their rehabilitation, Thompson and Venables are taught to conceal their past, along with receiving an education.
There's one-on-one teaching. You know, there's people who've got to pay for that kind of education. They got it scot-free. They were given money to go out on days out. They were taking the swimming baths. They were always escorted, never on their own. They went shopping for themselves as well, buying all kinds of designer clothes. You know, a lot of people out there work so hard and still can't afford things like that for their kids, but they, you know, they're good kids. But these two committed that crime and were given all luxuries like that, designer clothes, you know. It's just unbelievable, the amount of money that was spent on them.
Two-year-old James Bulger has died at the hands of two 10-year-old boys in a cruel and sustained attack. Having endured a painful trial to see his killers brought to justice, his family now learn of the treatment they are receiving, whilst allegedly being punished for his murder.
They were allowed to keep their own bedrooms out. One was a Man U supporter, so we had all wallpaper and Man U bedding on his bed. They were given computer games, they were allowed to play snooker. I've never said lock them up and throw away the cake. I knew one day they would be released, but the way they were treated like that, that's what's the awful thing about it.
As Robert Thompson and John Venables serve their time, the debate on how long they should be detained rages. In 1999, the boys, now 16 years old, are given news that devastates Denise and her family. The European courts announced that the original trial in 1993 was not impartial, sending shockwaves throughout Merseyside and the rest of the UK.
They're dealing with human beings here who have feelings and emotions, but of course that isn't the way that it gets dealt with. I do feel that the European Court of Human Rights was the wrong place for this law to be set.
The European Court decided that while the trial was not illegal, it was unfair, and really they suggested cosmetic changes, and that's all it is, cosmetic, that there wouldn't be wigs and gowns.
I do not believe that judges from, with all due respect, from nations in Eastern Europe are competent to express a ruling.
This announcement from the European courts sparks a lengthy review as to when the killers should be eligible for release, with one of the top lords in the country delivering his verdict.
I was hoping he was going to say because of the crime that he committed, he wasn't going to let Thompson and Venables be released early, and he was going to make sure he'd done more time in the secure rooms. And I was hoping and praying that he would have said, and go on to do time in an adult prison. But you never.
Lord Chief Justice Wolfe was making his decision on whether they should be given authority to apply for parole, and he trotted out a whole list of reasons why these two had actually been rehabilitated, how they were model pupils and were fully entitled to be returned to society because they were no longer a threat, and that it would be better for them, in his words, not to be exposed to the corrosive atmosphere of a young offenders institution. There are letters from Thompson to other boys that he was writing to in which he clearly demonstrates that he thinks that the whole thing is a joke and that he's totally obsessed with violence and sex. This is as a 12, 13-year-old, and clearly is not being rehabilitated, and he is just playing the system. A female member of staff had sex with John Venables in the months before he was coming up to be paroled. Is that the hallmark of an institution which was successfully rehabilitating this person to return to society?
Despite grave misgivings from James's family, Thompson and Venables are cleared for release just 6 months later. In the summer of 2001, they are given new identities, at an estimated cost of £250,000 each, released into society and provided with secret locations to live. They are 18 years old and have spent no time in an adult prison.
The whole entire family felt really upset and up in arms and couldn't believe, they were getting released. It was one of the main talking points of the family for a long time. We still couldn't get our heads around it. I was led to believe if either of them got into any more trouble, I would be the first to be contacted and know about this. I don't believe they should have been given new identities. I think it's absolutely disgusting. There's hospitals without machines there that, save kids' lives, saves anyone's lives who is screaming out for money to buy these machines. So I think to give these new identities and the amount of money it's costing, I think it's absolutely disgusting. These hospitals should be getting that money, not them too.
I don't believe that they are in danger from a baying mob, personally. I think they could be accommodated somewhere in the UK at a secret location without having to change their names, and they could live their lives and live with the consequences of what they've done. To give them false identities means they have to live a lie.
They couldn't get in touch with any of the family, myself or any of the family. So I thought, it's a bit of comfort, but I thought, well, hang on, does that mean to say I'm a prisoner in Merseyside? Can't I venture out of Merseyside then, in case I bump into one or both of them? I think they should have kept their own names. They should have done the 15 years. They would have been out now. They would have been living normal lives. Although I'm still without James, I would have had to live with that.
For 9 years, the killers of James Bulger re-enter society and continue with their lives under strict guidelines. But in 2010, a chilling crime brings one of these infamous criminals back into the public consciousness.
I was surprised when Venables was rearrested because it came completely out of the blue. There was no forewarning of it.
I was just hoping and praying that no one else was hurt or murdered by either of them. And that was my only wish, don't let them hurt anyone else.
It was broken in the press before it was publicly stated. How on earth the powers that be thought they could keep that secret, I have no idea. They really are not in the modern age of the instant media. Obviously, they've got a different agenda to follow, but it must be in the public interest to know when a criminal of his notoriety is rearrested.
News quickly spreads that Venables has been rearrested. But in a shock decision, Justice Secretary Jack Straw withholds the reasons from the public.
I'm sorry I can't give more details at the moment. I appreciate the very intense public interest in this.
But parts of the media retaliate by suggesting why the murderer has been arrested again. And eventually, the government is forced to speak out.
The police were called into his flat or apartment, wherever he was living. They went through his computer, which Venables tried to snatch the computer off them and tried to smash it up into bits. As thick as he is, the police managed to get the computer off him. And that's when they found all the child porn on it.
If you're resisting arrest, sir, we have a warrant for this, sir.
Rumours that James's murder may have involved a sexual nature circulated when he was killed. Now this new allegation calls Venables into question once more.
I was absolutely blown over by news that it was Venables. When that came out, I just couldn't believe it.
After considering all of the evidence at this trial, it is clear that the intentions of this person were sinister and wrong.
As Venables appears via video link in the courts, Denise and her family are to learn further alarming news.
Venables was reported drinking in Liverpool. In nightclubs, he's been reported into going to Everton games, which is only 5 minutes away from where I'm living. Although not Everton supporters, but Everton have supported my charity in the past. Could have been sitting right next to him. You know, I could have spoke to him. I could have even had a drink with him. I don't know. I've got family who are Everton supporters and do go to the matches. I've got nieces who drink in Liverpool. How do I know that any of my nieces haven't been chatted up by Venables? One of them could have brought him home to their houses. No one would know in the family.
The alarm bell should have been ringing long before he was discovered to have committed the crimes that he had.
It is on your computer.
With Venables under scrutiny once more, the Ormond report is commissioned to look into his background and behaviour over the past years. The facts are now glaringly obvious. Venables had compromised the terms of his licence. But Denise also learned that he had been arrested twice whilst on probation. Once after a drunken brawl, where he received a warning, and also for drug possession, where officers gave him a caution and a curfew.
He's a high-profile prisoner on parole. If he gets involved in violence, I believe that should be dealt with seriously, and it should have resulted in his parole being rescinded and in being recalled, effectively, for treatment and punishment. Is it surprising that Denise does not have confidence in the capacity and the commitment of the powers that be to handle this case correctly?
And despite the cost of a new identity, Venables has been rumoured to reveal who he really is.
They may be at liberty, but they'll never be free. And I'd heard that he'd had a few drinks from time to time, that he'd had drugs. He would blag about who he was when he had drink. And he was becoming a nightmare security-wise.
I think it needs a fresh approach. Is it possible in the internet age to successfully give someone a new identity? I'm not thoroughly convinced that it is.
As one shocking revelation after another is revealed, Denise also has to learn of Venables' most recent alleged crimes.
Then the allegations got read out in court. I try not to think of half the things that he's been up to again, but You know, sometimes it's really hard. He even pretended to be a mother with a 7-year-old child who he tried to sell for sex on the internet. It was just sickening, it was just stomach churning.
Venables had allegedly downloaded over 50 indecent images of children and is charged with possessing and distributing them. He pleads guilty. He is given a 2-year sentence.
I don't know whether he's going to be kept inside or whether he's going to be released, but I hope they do see sense and I hope they do keep him inside, not for his safety, but for other people's safety.
Thompson appears to have managed to stay largely out of trouble. Whether that's because he's more cunning or clever than his counterpart, we don't yet know. But if I was a betting man, I'd say we haven't heard the end of either of them.
I don't think lessons are being learnt in this at all. The only lessons that have been learnt is mothers and fathers now are more protective over the kids and they tend to keep an eye out on them, especially when they're out shopping, and I urge them to do that.
The horrific murder of James Bulger has never been far from national headlines, often in relation to the monsters who took his life. But for Denise and her family, this shall never detract from the memory of their little boy, whose innocent life was so cruelly taken.
No words can explain how much I miss him. There is not a day that goes by where I don't think of him. He's the first person I think of a morning. He's a very bubbly little child. He just loved to play, didn't give me a minute. He loved being read to and he used to read the books back to me. He was just so lively from the minute he opened his eyes to the minute he closed them. He was just lovely to be around.